I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Today we're slotting in our gems, drinking deep of the old blood, and preparing to face horrors beyond our comprehension, as my community ranks the Bloodborne bosses from easiest to hardest. I just want to say I am so sorry if my voice sounds awful today. I am fighting through a cold, but I still want to get this video out. Thank you to all 150 members who took part in this community ranking. For those of you not familiar with the system, I ask the voters to rank every boss on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being extremely easy and 10 being impossibly difficult. We work out the average score and that determines the placement. Normally that's enough, but for today's video, we actually have some ties, bosses that manage to score the exact same amount of points. In this case, I then refer to my "which boss do you feel is the hardest in Bloodborne" question that I use at the end of the poll, and whichever boss in the tie got more votes there takes the higher spot. Now then, let's not waste any more time. My community's Bloodborne easiest to hardest bosses, ranked. And let me know if you agree with my community down below. At number 22, we have the Witches of Hemwick, who scored a total average of 1.7 out of 10. We're starting off strong, as I fully agree that the witches are in contention for the easiest boss in Bloodborne. They're a gimmick fight where you have to avoid the minions they spawn, looking for the red glow of the witch's lantern to figure out her location. You start off facing one, and then once she's slain, her sister comes in, forcing you to do the whole song and dance again. The main danger you'll face in this fight is the magic of the witches on the second phase. They have an arcane projectile that holds the player in place if it connects, which can be just enough time for a minion to get off a deadly attack on the player. They're not pushovers despite the low ranking, but once you learn that the witches always spawn in the same place at the start of the fight, and you realize that entering the boss arena with no insight means the witches can't spawn their minions to attack you, yeah, you can effectively neuter the divas. Or can you? One voter shares a unique story, one that may make you realize the truth. The Witches of Hemwick are the hardest bosses in Bloodborne. Witches of Hemwick is the most difficult boss in any video game I've ever played. When I first walked into the arena and it summoned a normal enemy from this very area, I knew I was in for a challenge. The witch's only attack, the AoE explosion, was brutally punishing, as it overall took nearly 15% of my health bar. Her insanely large health bar of about 10 hits worth of health felt artificially increased, and the part where she stares at a wall for 30 seconds nearly guaranteed my death. After hours upon hours of attempts, I finally killed the witch, but as I held the controller with my shaking hands, I realized that a second health bar appeared. As I stared at the screen in utter disbelief and despair, I realized the other witch revived the first one, and they gained even more harder moves, consisting of a comically fast projectile traveling at a pace of about 1 kilometer per hour, and a grab so unreactable it puts JuJuJewel to shame, while also spawning double the common enemies. After months of on and off grinding attempts, at blood level 387 with 2 summons, I finally managed to best those opponents, and I couldn't believe it for several minutes straight, before starting to do the Orphan of Kos screams in real life. Truly, the Bloodborne of video game bosses. At number 21, we have the Celestial Emissary, who scored a total average of 1.88 out of 10. It says a lot about our bottom 2 that you could switch them around in the poll and not a single person would bat an eyelid. The Celestial Emissary follows the same pattern as the Witches of Hemwick, where the main danger comes from your ability to crowd control the enemies in the arena with you. This time, kin will spawn in the Lumen Flower Garden, and the goal is to attack the kin that's most uwu-shy timid of the bunch. Do enough damage and they'll explode into a bigger kin with an even easier to attack hitbox. You'll likely reach this boss with a near fully upgraded weapon, so like the footage I'll probably have to loop in the background, you'll be finished with this fight in a few moments. Personally, it's my easiest fight in Bloodborne because at least the witches take a little time to slay, as you're forced to engage with their main mechanic. Here, that's not really the case. The only danger comes from failing to cull the herd effectively, as the kin can rack up solid damage if you play cocky and let them get those hits in. But have any weapon with remotely any range, and you don't have to worry about a thing. And yet the Chalice dungeon variant is even easier, if you can believe such a statement. But we'll get to that in the next community ranking though. Beating up the Celestial Emissary is the best form of therapy. Gamers will really beat up the Celestial Emissary for fun instead of going to see a therapist, come on guys. At number 20, we have the Cleric Beast, who scored a total average of 3.71 out of 10. I'm genuinely quite surprised to see the Cleric Beast this low on the list. I was expecting it to beat out a couple more bosses, but at the same time, perhaps it's a good thing that the first proper boss of Bloodborne is also considered one of the easiest. The game's introduction to beast bosses, the only difficulty in this fight comes from the camera, which attempts to screw the player over at any given opportunity due to the narrow nature of the bridge boss arena. Outside of that, the Cleric Beast has a few hard-hitting combos for the early game that, if you're still in that dodge backwards Dark Souls mindset, you will be punished by. Getting in close, being aggressive, and not being afraid to take a hit or two is your best bet to winning this fight. It does leave you open to its grab attack, but if you're at full health, it's not going to immediately kill you anyway. I love that the Cleric Beast also introduces the concept of weak points, as if you damage the head, you can cause it to stagger, getting a visceral opportunity and being able to do more damage there for a brief period. Breakable limbs is a mechanic in Bloodborne that doesn't get enough spotlight despite how important it is for the beast bosses. Something I found surprising though is that none of the voters had anything to say about the Cleric Beast, just comparisons to Lawrence's fight later in the game. And this is reflected in the stats, as nobody ranked the Cleric Beast as their favourite or least favourite boss in the game. His music made more of a splash than he did, and sadly that's how the cookie crumbles. At number 19, we have the Living Failures, who scored a total average of 3.71 out of 10. Tied with the Cleric Beast, the Living Failures placed higher as they received a single vote for hardest boss, while the Cleric Beast did not. Now personally, I would swap this pair around, but the voters are in charge and I respect the decision made. The Living Failures are the weakest of the DLC fights in Bloodborne, effectively a second attempt at the gimmick of the Celestial Emissary fight, but done a little bit better in my opinion. Each of the failures has their own health bar, which is tied to the boss fight's health pool. It's a DPS check, where you just have to do enough damage to the community health bar to win. The failures have their long-reaching arm swings, which are easy to dodge through due to their slow wind-up, but will still connect every once in a while if you're not careful. They've got magic attacks they can fire, which can catch you off guard because there could be an enemy off camera firing at you so you won't even know it's coming. Most famously though, they have a giant meteor summon, which you can dodge by hugging the left side of the giant lumen flower, as the meteors always appear from the same direction. There's no real danger to this fight unless you're using a subpar weapon, but I've always been a defender that the Living Failures, while easy, is still a nice palate cleanser before Lady Maria. The Living Failures, do I need to explain? Legit just a bunch of enemies sharing a health bar, not an actual boss. Come on voters, I was expecting at least one self-deprecating joke regarding the name of the Living Failures. Instead, we get a valid point about how these are simply enemies sharing a health pool. I actually like this concept for a boss when done right, but that doesn't make them particularly hard by any stretch of the imagination. At number 18, we have the Moon Presence, who scored a total average of 3.73 out of 10. Just 0.02 above our previous two entries. Something had to have gone wrong in the balancing department at FromSoft, as I think it's astounding to see the true final boss placed in the 5 easiest fights in Bloodborne. But are we surprised? I mean, the Ascension ending is all about us overcoming the power of the moon presence via the third umbilical cords, and how it has no real power over us. In that sense, you can argue the easy fight makes complete narrative sense. However, I can't help feeling for the people who got the Hunter's Assistant ending and thought, wow, I should replay the game so I can actually fight the moon presence, only to discover he's easy to stagger, attacks come out extremely slow, and the one dangerous move that leaves you on 1 HP gives you a whole lunch break to recover your health before the next attack. The moon presence is all style, no substance, which is a genuine shame because that aesthetic is top-notch. I'd argue it should be lower on the list, but I can accept that some of the moon presence's claw combos can be devastating if not countered correctly. I wish the moon presence had more of a, well, presence. It makes sense why it was like that, but it could have been so much cooler. I wish they went extra with the red eye power having multiple effects, like no rally or blood vials to heal. Either way, cool concept, I just wish they followed through. Agreed. Had the moon presence been able to affect your ability to rally, or perhaps taken away some of your blood vials, I think its ultimate attack would be seen as something more threatening. Or, hot take, maybe the moon presence should have just been a gimmick boss, something cinematic similar to the Divine Dragon. The moon presence being so easy is quite the letdown. You'd expect the Great One controlling the Hunter's Dream to be extremely powerful, only for it to go down in half a minute. It does have that one cool move where it reduces your health to 1, but then it just goes AFK for 5 seconds afterwards, allowing you to rally your health back up, making it rather pointless. Overall, a massive disappointment for the true final boss. There's a reason why the moon presence ranked low on my final boss ranking video last year, link in the description if you want to watch it. At number 17, we have the One Reborn, who scored a total average of 4.04 out of 10. While I think the One Reborn has always been clowned on for being a forgettable boss, whose introduction is far more interesting as a cutscene than anything of note in the actual fight, I actually do think it's in the right spot here. While the One Reborn is certainly easy, as you can kill the Bell Maidens Tower Knight style after the fight starts, I will say the combos that the boss can perform can be brutal. The attack where he drops corpses from the sky is one that's caught me off guard more times than I care to count, and if you're not watching your health, it could very easily slip away from you. His torso is his weak point, and he has one on both sides of his body, so if one head is indisposed, go for the other one, Duke's Dear Freya style. The only attack I find straight up annoying is the acid that covers the floor. It makes it hard to approach and does stagger damage that will keep you animation locked until you can roll out of the sludge. The One Reborn is severely underrated. The crowning achievement of the School of Mensis is exactly what all the invading Great Ones wanted to do all along, creating a brand new Great One. The fact that the only faction able to birth one is the Silly Cage Head faction is hilarious. My only question is, why doesn't the One Reborn drop an umbilical cord? My read on the situation is that the One Reborn was ultimately a failed Great One, an attempt that only partially succeeded, thus no umbilical cord. And good on the Silly Cage guys for managing that, but what does this have to do with the boss's difficulty? The One Reborn is just so frustrating. The limbs are constantly hitting, the acid attack just feels so unfair, like it's supposed to be more visual than anything else. There is something very frustrating about approaching this boss only for it to flail every limb on its body, guaranteeing you will take damage and be staggered out of your attack animation every fucking time without fail. The One Reborn made me stop playing because of his runback and stupid mechanics. I was underleveled as well. Nowadays he's a joke, but one with a banger design. Also, the limb breaks every time are so cool. God, that runback. Going down the elevator, past the dogs, into the teleportation pool that I don't think we ever got a lore explanation for, down the tower, down the stairs, and then over to the boss arena. It's a very tedious process. Makes sense why the One Reborn got 23 votes for least favourite boss in the poll. At number 16, we have Murgo's Wet Nurse, who scored a total average of 4.17 out of 10. She's the second of 3 bosses on today's list to not have any votes for best or worst boss, happily vibing in the middle ground, content that her design is cool enough that nobody ever harps on her too much, but also being unable to stand out due to the ease of her fight in the endgame. Murgo's Wet Nurse uses a series of curved blades that she spins and flurry attacks with, in a similar vein to a dancer. The design of this hooded purple figure dressed in finery is one of my favourites in the series. It's if a Nazgul decided it's time to slay! Her stretchy attacks can be terrifying as she can elongate her reach to strike the player, and if you're caught right in front of her as she's doing the lawnmower towards you, you're dead meat. The hardest attack is her Darkness cast, as she'll create a series of clones to attack the player, and it's up to you to attack the real Wet Nurse while dodging all of the fakes. Luckily, her health pool is pretty limited for an endgame boss, and her attacks are easy enough to punish. Plus, many commenters in my old Bloodborne videos and my final bosses video reminded me that the Wet Nurse's Darkness attack is actually an AoE, and can be dodged away from with the right timing. Such a cool kit, but she's got way too many counters to make her viably hard. Out of every boss, the most underwhelming for me was Murgo's Wet Nurse. I mean, the entrance and build-up made it seem like a super boss, but in gameplay it's just extremely easy. Even the Darkness attack is very underwhelming because other than a jump scare factor, it barely has any real difficulty. This is all very bad, especially considering it can be your final boss. Which is a very valid point. Murgo's Wet Nurse technically is a final boss, as you can achieve the Yharnam Sunrise ending immediately upon defeating her, which might not leave the best impression on the player. I do think Bloodborne's endgame is a little underbalanced, which is why I think the DLC goes so hard by proxy. Murgo's Wet Nurse feels like she's intentionally trying not to hit you. Standing behind her is the equivalent of playing peekaboo with a baby. She's confused and can't figure out where you are. I have nothing to add, I just found this comment hilarious. I do like Murgo's Wet Nurse, but I clown her with love, not hate. At number 15, we have Mikolash, Host of the Nightmare, who scored a total average of 4.3 out of 10. Easily the most hated boss in the poll, he scored 44 votes for least favourite boss, which was the largest by a wide margin. Mikolash, on paper, should rank lower than he is. He's a humanoid enemy who runs away from you most of the time, forcing you to memorize a confusing series of hallways and corridors until you finally corner him, upon which you wail on him for massive damage until he vanishes, rinse and repeat until death. His minions pose no threat, the skeletons being pretty easy to avoid, while the attendants of Murgo provide solid damage but are also easy to run past. Now, the main threat belongs to Mikolash's ability to cast a Call Beyond in his second phase, an arcane star attack that will absolutely decimate a new hunter's health bar, potentially even one-shotting the player. It's such a cheap attack that you have to have super fast reflexes to counter before it's cast. Otherwise, pray you know the dodge timings. Spoilers, I don't. Combined with a tedious amount of wasted time every time you have to restart the fight from square one, it's no surprise everyone hates this man and the voters saw fit to ensure that everybody knows just how much. Mikolash is a hard one to rank because he seems really easy, and then all of a sudden he one-shots you, making him really inconsistent. Especially in New Game Plus, where he's even more likely to one-shot you. Mikolash? More like Mika Trash. Get it? Cause he's a... Never mind. Oh, and fuck Mikolash. I don't care if it's Cos or Cosm or whatever. Fuck you. I don't think I'll ever be the same person I was before I fought Mikolash. That man has ruined my entire life. Now every playthrough I do of Bloodborne is a personal attack on Mikolash. I hate him. Yes, Mikolash is irritating, and his one-shot Call from Beyond is cheap and stupid, but I get Mikolash. He's a little troll, dancing and giggling as he taunts us. Real Skull Kid from Zelda energy. At the end of the day, Mikolash is just that one YouTube commenter in my comment section that always tells me that I'm incorrect and my opinions are wrong, and I'm at peace with that. At number 14, we have Amygdala, who scored a total average of 4.74 out of 10. Amy is such an interesting boss for me, especially when it comes to difficulty, because I think if you take her on underleveled, she'll hand you your ass and then some. Those slams can be rough, and the 3-hit combo it can land on you is brutal. The real challenge is that Amy, like Dark Eater Midir from Dark Souls 3, has a singular main weak point, the head, and attacking anywhere else is like trying to chip paint off a wall. There's just no point. If you've got a long-reaching weapon or a blunt boy like my Kirk hammer to slam into that cranium, you'll likely be fine, but not everyone shares that experience. She's too big for the game to properly show you what she's doing if you're not several meters away from her, which has the trade-off of never reaching her weak point in time. Said weak point is a nightmare to hit in general because she never uses attacks that leave her head open, at least when I fight her. And on higher New Game Plus cycles, she can one-shot you with her attack where her arms smash into the ground with a weird magic aftershock. I've beaten her 3 times, and I've never had any fun with her fight on any of these runs. Props for the visual design though. I certainly see where this voter is coming from. Amygdala doesn't leave her weak point exposed for as long as other bosses in the series, so if you're not already perfectly positioned, you're not going to nail your attack window. Base game Amy has a fair amount of health and you can tank the damage, but New Game Plus Amy is brutal and a real challenge. Still, having learned the moveset due to the Defile Chalice Amygdala from the Chalice dungeons, I can't help but look at the Nightmare Frontier variant with a sense of, oh, it's just you. I do think she's a bit low, could have been a few spots higher, but definitely a middle of the pack type of difficulty. At number 13, we have Dark Beast Paarl, who scored a total average of 5.02 out of 10. I'm actually really happy to see Paarl in this middle ground because it's so easy to get either extreme of this fight, as this voter points out. Dark Beast Paarl is odd to rank since it all comes down to when you fight him. I beat him on my first playthrough as my 4th boss, right before Vicar Amelia, and I struggled a lot even though he is my favourite beast-type boss. Better than Ludwig? Yes. Issue is that if you fight him in Yaha Ghul, he will be really easy, so I'd recommend fighting him between the Witches of Hemwick and the Shadows of Yharnam. I feel like I have to give him a 5 in this one despite how hard he can be. And Paarl is the boss that received the most 5 out of 10s from the voters, a perfect middle ground. He's one of the few bosses to utilize lightning in the main game, with electrified slams and claw swipes, a charged AoE that will fry you if you're too close, and a level of aggression that forces you to go for hits as rallying your health back is the main way to stay in contention. Eventually, it's possible to stagger Paarl out of his lightning buff, which is when the fight gets easier, as he'll flop to the ground like a dead fish, giving you a ton of time to do damage, and future staggers will come faster and faster. In fact, how quickly you can stagger him is another aspect of why commenters gave him a middle spot. Paarl is completely dependent on whether you can stagger him all the way to victory, a 2, or not, a 9. So 5 is relatively accurate. He's so fun, frenetic, and his arena is wide enough to accommodate for his bulk, unlike, say, the Cleric Beast. It's just a solid fun time that doesn't require me to rip my hair out to succeed, and beating him early in my playthrough was one of the more satisfying feats I've had in Bloodborne. At number 12, we have Vicar Amelia, who scored a total average of 5.03 out of 10. Yup, just a 0.01 difference from Paarl. And once again, this is a position I agree with. Vicar Amelia is a great wall that separates the early game players from the mid game and beyond, as she has a well-rounded kit that rewards players who have taken the time to level up. If you can stagger her out of her animations, you will be fine. Avoid her large sweeping swipes, survive her ear-piercing screeches and her wide arena leaps. The main challenge is if you can stop her healing animation. If you're not doing enough damage as a low-level character, her healing can catch you in a never-ending loop that leaves Amelia feeling fierce slay hunty. She's perfectly designed because she's not meant to be this insurmountable obstacle, she's just meant to be hard enough to encourage the player to explore, which leads them to Hemwick Charnel Lane to get the Rune Workshop tool. Now sadly, there isn't a terrible amount to say in regards to what the voters thought of Amelia, because she didn't really get any mentions. just one voter who said, "Vicar Amelia is my favourite boss, and I'm sad she didn't get a unique boss theme since she shares one with the Cleric Beast." Which, I love that she's somebody's favourite, and that tracks, as she did get one vote for favourite boss in Bloodborne. But beyond that, there's just not really much else to say. She's as beast bosses get, down to her breakable limbs and melee-focused moveset. Oh, and the furries fucking love her. At number 11, we have the Blood-Starved Beast, who scored a total average of 5.28 out of 10. A boss I'm not surprised to see as high as he is. Blood-Starved is a fight that is often considered to be incredibly difficult for new players, but once you've got the rhythm and the trick down, ends up being one of the easiest fights in the game. His fast aggression and lunges make him hard to punish, as he leaps the length of the arena, the camera doing mental gymnastics just to keep up. But as long as you dodge inwards and to the left side of the boss, you'll avoid almost every attack he can throw at you. Once the poison enters the mix, the fight becomes more perilous, as any mistimed dodge could lead to a slow poison status where you'll need to have an antidote handy to clear the debuff. Poison in Bloodborne feels much faster to me than other Souls games, and with a boss that's already quite aggressive in its moveset, taking the time to use an antidote is rough. When the third state hits and it starts spewing poison mist around itself though, I tend to say fuck it and just go for the kill. A bit of fire paper will do the job, though the challenge comes from there being no way to cheese the fight. No breakable limbs for extra damage, nor a weapon that ends the boss instantly. You have to learn and adapt, but once you've got the movement right, the struggle is no longer real. First time playing Bloodborne, Blood-Starved Beast was hardest for me because of poison and the runback. I generally find Bloodborne's boss runbacks to be incredibly forgiving, with the path down to Blood-Starved being extremely well designed, with a series of shortcuts to make getting there as quick as possible. But that doesn't change how long it can go between attempts, which makes learning the moves a little bit tougher. Overall, a solid early game challenge alongside Amelia, who ensure that you know how to play Bloodborne before heading into the Forbidden Woods and beyond. Hey all, sorry to be a bother, but I'm trying to reach 35,000 subscribers by October of 2024. If, after finishing this video, you like what you see, consider parrying that subscribe button to stay up to date on all my future videos. Back to the regularly scheduled programming. At number 10, we have Rom the Vacuous Spider, who scored a total average of 5.52 out of 10. When I look at the bosses left on the list, Rom stands out to me as completely out of her depth in terms of quality, because, by God, we have some amazing fights coming up that really earn their difficulty, but with Rom, the difficulty never felt fair. She's technically a gank fight where once you enter, you have to contend with all of her little spider children before poking the big mama with your stick. If you've got a high DPS weapon, you can get a ton of damage on her, and even stun her before her first teleport to do extra damage. The moment she reappears though, things go to shit. Rom has a host of magic-based attacks that she can and will use at will. The easiest to deal with are her point-blank AoEs that she uses if you're attacking her for too long. Then there's the meteor shards rising from the ground, which I generally avoid quite well. However, her Meteor Strike attack that forces you to run in a direction and pray because projectiles will lock onto your position is not fun. There's no way to block the attack, no pillars like her Chalice dungeon variant to mitigate the damage, all the while you've got baby spiders clawing at you from all sides. This fight is doing too much, and the arena, while gorgeous, does not allow for the player to work around Rom's moveset. Rom was also horrible the first time, her spiders are such bastards, but if you know your upgrade routes, she goes down. You need raw damage, and quickly if you want to take Rom down with any element of haste. You can't afford to fuck around with baby spiders once the magic is being used. I have arachnophobia, so I hate spiders. Rom is a big potato spamming at you while her minions are jumping at you. Please make it stop. Same, bestie. Same. At number 9, we have Father Gascoigne, who scored a total average of 5.98 out of 10. The last of the early game fights on this list, I think it's fitting to see Gascoigne this high in the rankings. After all, he's a mandatory boss that challenges the player on whether they understand the fundamentals of Bloodborne. He's aggressive, wields the same hunting gear that you have the potential to use, and is designed so that all of his attacks punish anyone trying to back away to safety. Dodge inwards, or suffer the consequences. I went on record in a past video stating I felt Gascoigne was the hardest boss for me in Bloodborne, not in the sense that he's the most difficult fight ever, but more so for what he represents. He's the reason so many players never continued the game, reaching his wall and finding themselves blocked completely. And in that sense, I really respect the fight, especially once he breaks out the beast form, because that punishes anything but attacking and dodging inwards. You can use the music box to stun him twice, but new players might not realize this gimmick, and even then it's not a guaranteed win, just some guaranteed damage. He always kills me at least once per playthrough, and that's garnered a lot of respect from my part. Father Gascoigne is a perfect first test of ability. Not only is he genuinely tough to beat, but also a showing of what to expect in this game. You will be fighting hunters and beasts, while getting to see firsthand how the beast plague spreads and corrupts this world. He really sets the tone, and makes you wonder just what's around the corner if he's the first mandatory boss. On the flip side though, Gascoigne is so stupidly easy to parry, and it makes his fight a borderline joke if you know how to do it. So because of that, he ranks low on my personal list, but I totally understand why he ranks where he does for others. Most of the hunter fights in Bloodborne can be brought down by parrying, which is a valid complaint. Sometimes a parry can feel too powerful, and thus a fight that was initially difficult swings to the other extreme. Where do you fall, viewers? Let me know in the comments. At number 8, we have the Shadows of Yharnam, who scored a total average of 6.05 out of 10. I'm very proud of my Nazgul-looking gank trio. If you're a fan of my channel, you'll have noticed my incessant love for this boss, as I genuinely feel it's a multi-enemy fight balanced correctly. 3 distinct enemies, 1 melee, 1 ranged, and 1 hybrid, a set enraged state that is reached by either downing 1 shadow or lowering the group health enough, a series of stretchy limbs and snake attacks that allow the shadows to feel unique compared to their late-game enemy counterparts, and the arena is gorgeous to boot. Personally, I've never had trouble with this grouping, more annoyed by the runback than the fight itself, and it's very easy to get the shadows AI into a stunlock situation where you can whittle the health bar down with little worry. But when you're put on the back foot, the shadows make you work for every inch of progress, every slither of health. I can tell people who struggle with multiple enemies will find these guys hard, as they average between getting 6 and 7 out of 10 from our voters. I'd love to talk about so much more, but to make it short, on my first playthrough, I bit into my phone after failing to the shadows again and again, and after defeating them, I felt so good and considered them one of my favourite bosses in the game. Okay, first of all, is your phone okay? That's hardcore. But I get it. Sometimes it's the bosses you struggled with the most that end up sticking in your mind as memorable fights. Nobody had any negative comments on the shadows, which I think speaks to their overall quality. A well-deserved spot on today's list. At number 7, we have Gehrman the First Hunter, who scored a total average of 7.03 out of 10. That's a major jump from our previous entry. Gehrman is one of the final bosses of the game, a battle against the Hunter's assistant, and his overwhelming speed and prowess with the Burial Blade. I've gone at length talking about how much I adore the narrative of this fight, the music, the arena, the emotion, but the gameplay, well, Gehrman is one of the more fluid hunters in the game, able to take a hit and deal it back with his iconic grunts and yells. His scythe has a ton of range, able to even grab and pull the hunter in for a punish. On top of that, he can buff himself midway through the fight via a damaging AoE that makes him even harder to avoid. He can be parried like any human, but I found his timings to be pretty difficult to predict, which led to what I'd say was an incredibly even fight. The pair of us blitzing through our resources as I tried to keep myself alive, while Gehrman hands me my ass. I especially love the part where he can parry the player before performing his own visceral attack. Love when bosses use the same mechanics as the player character. Gehrman is quite hard, but I don't hold back because he's at the end, I guess. So I expend every bullet, every blood vial. He's always hard, but I don't die to him often, he's just very intense. Yeah, this is my experience as well. I don't often fall in battle against the first hunter, but I can feel the gravitas of his fight pulling me in, which makes it feel more tense and thus more difficult than your average boss battle. But there's one voter out there that really got what makes Gehrman great, and I want to highlight their comment. Gehrman is my favourite boss in Bloodborne. Everything about his fight screams cinematic. Despite being the player's peer as a hunter and being bound to a wheelchair, you are far from his equal. The game communicates this expertly, with Gehrman stationed at the top of the hill. I can't gush about that shot enough. The fight itself is the hunter versus hunter combat that we all love. Everything is on the table. Both he and you can be parried, use trick weapon movesets, and are as fast as bullets. I'm not mad about him being a hard fight. If anything, it gives me an excuse to fight him again and again. Once you get his parry timings down, the fight becomes much easier. My only knock on him is that his phase 2 tends to drag the pace of the fight down, as it is difficult to get parry hits and punish attacks. But once he returns to his scythe, the pacing also returns to normal. Honestly, what I love about community rankings is getting to read why you guys love bosses so much. This stuff is gold to me. It's fascinating, and I'll always try to highlight these types of comments when and where I can. Gehrman, you've got some great supporters out there. At number 6, we have Lady Maria of the Astral Clock Tower, who scored a total average of 7.05 out of 10. Now, if we want to talk about a divisive fight when it comes to difficulty, Lady Maria feels like the poster child. When the DLC first came out, she was this brutal experience that you had to overcome to reach the fishing hamlet. Wielding the Rakuyo like an absolute boss, her attacks are fast but filled with purpose. And as her fight progresses, she's not just adding new moves to the mix, she's expanding upon the moves you're already used to dodging with her fire and her blood. Which on the one hand makes the fight more learnable, but it also makes it easier each time you play. Combine this with Lady Maria being extremely weak to parries, to the point where once you know her timing, there's little she can do to hurt you, and you're looking at a fight you'll have no trouble on next time you play. Is what I want to say, but one viewer absolutely nails how I feel when it comes to Maria, and I want to see how many of you agree. Maria seems easy to me every time, but somehow I die like 15 times because she's just explosive. There is something about Maria where you know you can get her to phase 3 relatively easily, you know how to beat her, how to ruin her lack of poise, and yet she still finds a way to take you out once, twice, 3 times. Lady Maria is a fascinating fight. It almost feels like a dance. Her movements are quick and clean while doing some of the most damage out of any boss. The idea that she is protecting the fishing hamlet from you, or protecting you from the old hunter's obsession with such determination that she breaks her own rules, is storytelling genius. Sadly, her fight has gotten much easier with time. Apparently you can R1 spam her with the right hand weapon to stunlock her, or just parry almost all of her moves. My favourite way to do this fight is no parry, but that's because it reintroduces a difficulty it used to have for me. This is my favourite fight in Bloodborne, no question. It brings up the case, do we knock boss fights because we can choose whether or not to parry them? That's entirely up for each voter to decide, but for me it does have to be taken into consideration. Unlike Gascoigne, Maria is an endgame fight, and what that means is that the player knows how to parry now, so they're more likely to get use out of it compared to Gascoigne. But nobody is denying that she's a tough fight and well worth the top 10, but she didn't make our top 5. At number 5, we have Marta Logarius, who scored a total average of 7.05 out of 10. Tied with Lady Maria, Marta Logarius got 3 votes for hardest boss, while Maria only got 1. So as such, he beats her in the ranking and breaks into our top 5. I'm not gonna lie, I'm actually surprised to see Logarius this high. I kind of forgot about him, but I'm not complaining. Our Rooftop Santa Claus is one of the more complex fights from the main game, able to fight from close range with his weapon swipes and his skull blast you can launch point blank, to his long range game, featuring ranged skulls and, upon reaching a certain health threshold, the flying swords that you need to vanquish to have a chance of surviving. Combined with a precarious arena that does allow for you to fall to your death, and you've got a recipe for a tough battle. In my first playthrough, it took me ages to take Logarius down, as he just feels so different to everything else in the game. He's an Elden Ring boss who happened to end up in Bloodborne, and I stand by that assessment. He's got a great aesthetic and a moveset that feels so out of place in Yharnam's world that it makes his fight incredibly difficult. As for the voters, well, I know a lot of players like him at least, and he is seen as maybe the most underrated boss in Bloodborne, but I have a special relationship with him. I fought him as early as possible on my first playthrough, and getting good against Santa on the roof of this snowy castle was a blast. Greetings from Germany to you and the rest of your community. P.S. I hope my English is still good enough, but please, if you want to feature my comment in your upcoming video, feel free to correct any grammatical mistakes I made. I'd be honoured, smiley face. Bam! You've been featured. Thank you for taking the time to leave that message. It was very kind, and I really like your story. He's relatively standard in his first phase, having soul magic and scythe swings that could easily catch you in the neck if you're not careful, but the second phase amps all the oh shit factors to 11. He flies around the stage looking like the damn Grim Reaper, pulls out swords, even more soul magic, and will absolutely go fucking wild right up until the fight is over. I'm not saying he's the toughest boss in the game, but if Get Good was a fight, this guy would be it. Agreed, he's not the hardest fight in the game, the 4 bosses above him definitely lay claim there, but in a vacuum he is extremely difficult, and the only reason I succeeded against him in my recordings you're seeing is because I had my original playthrough where I died over and over and over against him as experience. Good on the martyr. At number 4, we have Ebrietas, Daughter of the Cosmos, who scored a total average of 7.32 out of 10. Now, I just recently chatted about her in my Chalice Dungeon boss ranking video, link in the description, and I'm somehow shocked but also really happy to see her up here. Ebrietas is a genuinely tough fight. She's got tentacle slams for days, headbutts that stop you from hugging her front, she can fire frenzied poison that you best hope you've got sedatives for, and that's not including her arcane abilities. She can create an aura around herself that slowly depletes the health of anyone who enters, the particle effect sapping the strength of the player, even though you've got no choice but to approach her and do damage. And should she get off her arcane projectile volley, you best be running. I find her magic way harder to avoid in her main game fight, because there's something about the vastness of the Altar of Despair that makes Ebrietas tougher to corner down. In the Chalice Dungeon, she's in a smaller circular arena where I can take my time, strafe safely. Here, it's a lot more hectic, and there's a lot more running involved. Kin are weak to thrust weapons, so my choice of Kirkhammer likely isn't the best choice for this boss, which makes my experience pretty difficult. But I'm curious as to why some feel she's the pinnacle of boss difficulty in the game. Let's find out. I ranked Ebrietas very hard, a 9, because I fight her from the front. It's more fun to me. I know a lot of people stay in her back for the entire fight, but I personally don't think that's fun. I think she's a top 2 hardest boss in the main game. Funnily enough, I've actually tried the getting behind Ebrietas strategy myself, and I can never make it work. Must be a skill issue on my part. But I only end up fighting her from the front or the side, which means smacking that head anytime she lowers it, and praying I can get a visceral or 2. The biggest offender here is her goddamn charge. It's insane. It's incredibly annoying to dodge, and it has such a big hitbox whenever I fight her. Her charge always seems so inconsistent. Probably because of the counter damage it does when you, let's say, try to apply bolt paper and she reacts immediately and pummels you to the ground. Yeah, I'll definitely give you this one. Ebrietas has an infamously brutal charge with a really quick startup, which makes avoiding the attack a test of reflexes as opposed to skill. I can't even imagine doing a Blood level 4 run, and this commenter also points out that in Bloodborne, counter damage is extremely, extremely brutal. It's just unfair when you're attacked by a move that does so much damage, and then Bloodborne applies the counter effect as well, and Another comment also echoes this. That stupid charge she does where she turns her entire body into a hitbox basically ruins the fight's difficulty for me, because you're encouraged to stay in front of her to wail on her macaroni mouth, but that means you have no time at all to dodge the charge. We were this close to greatness. At number 3, we have Ludwig the Holy Blade, who scored a total average of 8.05 out of 10. Of all the fights on today's list, I think it's a fairly cold take for me to say that I feel Ludwig is actually the best balanced of the lot. He's hard, very hard, difficult if you don't have a fully upgraded weapon, and more so if you're using something that doesn't have a high DPS. But once you've got a good loadout, Ludwig's like any other boss, where it's about learning the moveset and the dodge timing to make progress. In fact, I've gone on the record stating I think his second phase, where he breaks out the Moonlight Greatsword, is easier than the first, as aside from one or two attacks, his swings are incredibly well telegraphed. His phase 1, where he jumps onto the ceiling or he lunges towards you with bestial intent, is brutal, but then you have moments where he tries to projectile vomit on you, giving the player a chance to run to his head and give him a smack. You have his great sword, able to one-shot you with specific attacks, but you're given such a long wind-up to avoid them, you can plan around it. And yet, Ludwig retains all his difficulty due to his high damage output. A single mistake is costly in this fight, as I recall from my original DLC playthrough where I died maybe 50 to 60 times. I just love that his moveset is easy to understand, but hard to master. A very refreshing difficulty curve. Ludwig is just peak, but his difficulty is strange. I was expecting a hard fight, but in the end, only his phase 1 was really hard. He's a beast with a really hard to read moveset, but still readable with practice. Exactly what I just said. I love being backed up by strangers on the internet. You go, voter! People always talk about how in Ludwig's boss fight it gets so intense during the second phase, with the cutscene and when the music kicks in, which it does of course, but I'll always stand by my opinion that first phase Ludwig is much harder than second phase Ludwig. Second is more telegraphed, while first seems so insane and unpredictable at first. All his fast attacks, high damage, arcane breath, his fast dashes, and especially when he jumps up, always makes me stressed. Once you learn to dodge to Ludwig's right in the first phase, however, he becomes much more manageable, but still definitely the boss I died the absolute most to. Love from Sweden, love the channel, and continue with the amazing content, man. Heart. Ah, bless, thank you so much for the kind comment. I think all of this is by design, though. Ludwig is more telegraphed in Phase 2 because he's more aware of his movements and attacks and skills. In Phase 1, he's a beast, erratic, and that makes him unpredictable, and I really like how the story is told through the fight like that. At number 2, we have Lawrence the First Vicar, who scored a total average of 8.45 out of 10. I knew from the moment I posted this community ranking who the top 2 fights would be, I just wasn't sure which order they'd place, and you all decided that Lawrence, while difficult, is only the second hardest fight. So why is Lawrence difficult? Well, it all comes down to his fire. Every attack of his has an aspect of flame, from AoEs that originate from his slams, to his swipes and grabs that make it incredibly difficult to find a decent opening. Now, I'm in the minority, I said it last year, I'll say it again. I think his enraged state where his legs shatter and he begins crawling after you is way easier than the first part of the fight. Here, you can control where he is and roughly how he'll move, strafing around him while waiting for openings to strike true. But I recognize with the amount of lava on the ground, and with Lawrence's heightened aggression, that not everyone is able to capitalize on that momentum. That one combo where he slams his claws forwards one after the other is an absolute nightmare, because it can start whenever and end whenever. At least his other attacks tend to leave him wide open for a good visceral punish. But enough about me, you guys voted him the second hardest boss, so why do you feel he's a brutal difficulty spike? I feel that, at least on New Game Plus, his scaling is just insane. He has way too much health for how much damage he deals, not helped by bosses with fire attacks having some really questionable hitboxes in this game. I just barely beat him on New Game Plus 2 with the help of Volta and another player. But when I helped a player on New Game fight him, I actually had a really good time. He was still tanky, but he didn't hit nearly as hard, and I was at like level 200 something, and that alone allowed me to actually have fun fighting him. As someone who doesn't really delve into New Game Plus and New Game Plus Plus unless it's for achievements, I can't comment on Lawrence's difficulty there, but I'm liable to agree with this comment. I know how scaling tends to go out of the window once you start going into New Game Plus cycles, but I never felt like the base game Lawrence was broken in terms of his DPS to life ratio. He's still brutal, and sometimes it feels like his phase 1 doesn't give you a chance to breathe, but I have dealt with worse. I find his second phase awful. His stomping attack that only ends whenever he feels like it is just ridiculous, and all the other attacks do way too much damage in a single hit. I also don't like the lava he leaves on the floor because it is way too punishing. Sometimes it feels like I only touched it with a toe, and all of a sudden I am dead in an otherwise good attempt. Yeah, I definitely agree that Lawrence's hitboxes don't always feel correct, especially in Phase 2. I think the fire element of his kit and needing to retune the Cleric Beast's moveset came at a cost, and the cost was hitboxes. We've seen similar issues in the Chalice dungeons as well, so it's not a shock. I also agree about the lava. If you so much as briefly touch it, you get caught in a very long stagger animation that is almost certainly going to get you killed, and it's just not fun game design. Lawrence is a difficult to a fault, in my opinion. His moves are hard to read, he can nearly one-shot you, and the worst part about this fight is that he has so much damn health. Bloodborne encourages you to sometimes trade blows with the enemy, and I feel Lawrence goes against this philosophy. Now this I agree with. Lawrence, in all my experiences with him, was always a boss where healing through the rally system didn't feel like a safe option. It was always blood vials or nothing. It goes against the systems Bloodborne teaches. And I'm not actually against that. I liked how Sekiro throws the Demon of Hatred at you, going against all of that game's teachings, and this is a similar situation, but it's not done to the same standard, and that's the issue. Great idea, but the execution was just a few years too early. At number 1, it's the Orphan of Kos, who scored a total average of 9.36 out of 10, the highest Soulsborne average to date in my rankings, only beaten by Luxasia the Complete from Lies of P, who scored a 9.41. The Orphan is the poster boy for difficult DLC boss fights, as it truly was in its own league when the old Hunters first launched. Nobody knew how to handle its level of aggression, and its moveset pre- and post-enrage state was so frenetic and frantic that it was hard to get a proper layer of strategy down. I can see exactly why the Orphan is tough. Tanky HP pool, a vast myriad of moves that it can use to placenta you into the ground, before summoning lightning and toxic fumes and a whole host of dark magic taken from the Eldritch, all the while he screams those haunting wails in your ear. 94 votes for hardest boss in the game, might I add. Lawrence, who was second, only got 31. Though the Orphan isn't the favourite boss, he only got 28 votes for best boss, while Ludwig got 43 and Maria got 44. I'm actually not able to speak on the Orphan's difficulty, because I beat him on my first ever attempt, and on my recorded footage you're seeing, I only died once. But let it be known that no matter how used to him you are, the tension as you try to get that final hit, as he darts away from you like a bat out of hell, is some of the most intense gaming you'll ever experience. Voters, what do you think? While I think Ludwig is the hardest boss, I believe Orphan is Bloodborne at its best. A battle to the last drop of blood against this horrifying creature, almost humanoid, but still alien, terrifying, fierce, and aggressive in its attacks, its agonizing screams as it strikes, the beautiful arena, and the tragic lore. Having played all Soulsborne games, only a few boss fights have made me feel the same visceral and melancholic sensation as overcoming Orphan. Starting off strong, I agree. The Orphan to me is something special. A real unique creature that brings together the Lovecraftian horror of Bloodborne at its finest, but I don't personally find him to be the hardest boss. But hey, maybe I'd change my tune if I were using the threaded cane or something. Orphan was the hardest for me because of his non-stop aggression and hard-hitting combos in Phase 1, which ended multiple runs for me. However, I am not giving it a 10 because in Phase 2, I often managed to exploit the move where he flies up in the air and once landed, leaving himself wide open for a backstab. People will always find a way to optimize a FromSoft boss. It's happened to the Orphan as he's got punishable attacks, which is exactly what we want. It's currently still happening to Melania in Elden Ring. And when Shadow of the Erdtree launches, whatever awaits us at the end will likely face a similar fate a few years down the line. I don't think we'll ever get a true 10 out of 10 impossible boss, but by God, we are starting to skirt that line. Orphan of Kos might be one of the hardest bosses to exist. He's quick, can change his attacks in the middle of combos, catching you off guard. His damage is insane, not to mention with Bloodborne's high counter damage. There are so many attacks he can do and none of them are scripted, and he can randomly choose when and how hard he will go on you. Also, his second phase is pure insanity. I've played Bloodborne since release, having finished countless playthroughs, challenge runs, and speed runs, and this is the only boss that consistently gives me a fight after 8 years now. And you can parry backstep him. Also, love your videos and enjoy the content a lot. Thank you so much. I think that what makes Orphan so dangerous, he's like a fighting game character, able to combo cancel at a moment's notice to do an attack you least expect. He's got so many different chains set up that you have to be light on your feet and ready to tank some hits, rally some health, and pray you don't get placented too hard. But that's also what I think a lot of people like about him. He has his detractors, of course, but he feels like a manageable obstacle to overcome with the right prep and the right practice. FromSoft giving you a gem that boosts damage against kin-type enemies by around 30% right before the Orphan fight, while not having him count as a kin enemy, is the cruelest thing they've ever done. Okay, I had no idea about this, but I think that's the funniest thing I've read all day. Whoever wrote this comment, if you're watching, let me know down below. I'd love to theoretically shake your hand for making me laugh. With that, Orphan, take your rightful place as my community's hardest boss in Bloodborne and its premier troll. And that's my list. Which Bloodborne boss is the hardest to you? Did my community get it right? Sound off in the comments below. And be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of my future videos. The next community ranking is going to be the Bloodborne Chalice dungeon bosses. There has already been a poll out for it, which I included in my Chalice dungeon video I released last week. So, assuming it's going to be open for maybe 1 or 2 more days, get on over there, give it a click, and tell me what you think. My social medias are on screen now. Feel free to follow where you feel comfortable. I recommend my Twitter, my Blue Sky, or my Discord. My Twitter is the best place to follow me, though. I would definitely recommend that most of all. A massive shout out to my YouTube channel members for supporting me for another month. You guys are amazing. $4.99 a month gets you 24-hour access to my Tuesday videos early, gets you a shout out at the bottom of the description, and a shout out at the end of the video. And a massive shout out to my patrons over on Patreon. I will be phasing my Patreon out towards the end of June. I kind of want to move everything over to YouTube. It's just easier for me. So thank you so much to my patrons for supporting me, and hopefully I can see you guys moving on over to the YouTube channel memberships at some point. Thank you for watching, everyone, and I'll see you guys next time. Adios.